The Wraith is the first example of a stealth killer in Dead by Daylight, and he is very okay at filling that role. He's not super great, but he isn't terrible either. It mostly just depends on how well you can use him, although I suppose that's true of pretty much all of the killers. When playing the Wraith, you can usually sneak up on people pretty well, but that is mostly reliant on whether you're using a specific add-on. That's for another time, though. We're here to talk about what Philip's base power offers, both the good and the bad, so let's get started. Unlike his launch buddies, the Wraith's power is not quite as self-explanatory as bear traps and a chainsaw. The Wailing Bell is the game's first stealth power, granting the incredible boon of becoming invisible when rung. Unfortunately, this isn't quite as useful as it may sound, though that sentiment mostly comes from my personal experience, and I am by no means a master of the Wraith. To get into the good of the power, let's start with the obvious, that being when you are invisible, no one can see you. But invisibility also makes you undetectable, which I'm sure is absolutely shocking. Jokes aside, what I'm referring to with this is the undetectable status effect, which hides your terror radius, which helps ensure that your invisibility erases your presence to such a degree that you are nearly, well, undetectable. This is all well and good, but invisibility comes with even more benefits than that. While invisible, you move at a blistering 6 meters per second, allowing you to get around the map a fair bit quicker than 4.6 meters per second would normally allow. This is great for scouting around the map, but it's even better when combined with the fact that you can still break things while invisible. Whether it be walls, pallets, or generators, nothing is safe from your invisible feat of fury. Keep in mind that you do become visible for the brief moment that you're breaking something. The main drawback to being invisible is that you can't attack people at all. You have to uncloak to do so. Uncloaking will take an agonizing 3 seconds, twice as long as cloaking, and you are slowed to an absolute crawl while doing it. This is made worse by the fact that cloaking and uncloaking are both achieved by banging on a big old bell that the Wraith is just lugging around. And naturally, bells have a tendency to be rather loud and often alert people to the fact that something is happening. This is a little bit counterintuitive for a stealth killer, but is necessary for balance, I suppose. Though the game does provide a saving grace in the form of a speed boost. When you finally finish that 3-second timer, you break out into a 6.9 meter sprint, achieving speeds that would make the Blight proud for 1 whole second. This may not sound like a lot, but if you wait until you are right on top of someone before uncloaking, that 1 second of blazing speed, combined with a lunge, is more than enough to catch up to a survivor and hit them. Pretty much the only way for them to avoid damage is to get something between them and you, such as vaulting a window or throwing down a pallet. So for all my belly aching, the slowdown and noise creation of uncloaking doesn't really matter, since most Wraiths I've come across will usually chase people while invisible, then uncloak and hit them. That being said, some may wonder how a chase can even happen when you're invisible, and that leads into the last element of the Wraith's power that I want to talk about. Your invisibility is incomplete. Okay, perhaps that's a little misleading. What I mean by this is that while normally you are 100% invisible and undetectable, once you get within 20 meters of Survivor, you are only about 80% invisible, since your body will instead shimmer a little, meaning eagle-eyed survivors will see right through your invisibility. This is another one of those balance things that makes stealth a little more difficult, but since you have to be pretty close to someone for this to even be a possibility, it probably won't pose much of an issue, since you should still be able to spot them long before they spot you. That's all I have to say about the Wailing Bell itself. Now let's move on to the perks. Philip's first unique perk is Bloodhound, which provides the incredible power of making survivors' blood pools glow, as well as stick around for 4 seconds longer than usual. Wouldn't call this an incredible perk by any means, but it can be very helpful for tracking injured survivors if they manage to shake you off. And that's it, really. It's a perk meant to make tracking survivors easier, and it does a perfectly fine job of that, but that's all it does. I don't really care for Bloodhound myself, but if you have difficulties tracking survivors, this can be quite helpful. Our next perk is another tracking perk, providing the benefit of making it so that when a survivor slips away from you in a chase, you will see their aura for 4 seconds, which will make it easier to catch up to them and reignite the chase. Naturally, this perk comes with a 40-second cooldown, since you would be literally impossible to shake off otherwise, but this perk can still be a great help if you keep having issues with people escaping your view during chases, especially since certain survivor perks like Lucky Break allow them to almost completely erase their presence after taking a hit. While this does have limitations, it is certainly an improvement over the original iteration of the perk, which made the scratch marks of survivors spawn closer together, a benefit that sounds good on paper, but in practice could sometimes make it harder to track survivors, the opposite of what it was meant to do. I think this is a good improvement, but there is a minor problem. Depending on how you play, this perk may be just a little bit less effective on Wraith specifically. You see, in order to activate this perk, you have to get into a chase, but if you chase someone while invisible, the chase never actually starts. This means that you have to use your power less to actually get use out of Predator, and that's a little dumb. It's a good perk, I think, just not for Wraith. Our last perk is an interesting one, to say the least. It's another instance of a perk that used to have an entirely different effect to the one it has now. What this used to do was increase your field of view by 27 degrees. That's it. This isn't useless. Being able to see more could definitely come in handy, since the first-person view is perhaps one of the biggest weaknesses of being a killer. Of course, now that the game has an actual FOV slider, this needed to be changed. So the new effect is more specialized in a way that is perhaps a bit questionable, but can definitely be helpful. When blinded, you gain 10% haste for 10 seconds. That's actually really strong for a haste boost. I don't think I've seen another perk that gives that much, and for such a long period as well. Of course, this perk suffers from one obvious flaw. You have to let a survivor blind you in order for it to work, which is inconvenient for a couple of reasons. Firstly, is the fact that being blind makes it kinda hard to actually chase someone, and blindness lasts roughly 4 seconds, give or take, so that really eats into your haste time. Compounding this issue is the fact that a survivor could use that haste against you. Overall, most of the time when blinded, you will probably just walk forward in the hopes that you'll remain roughly on the right track. And some survivors will take advantage of that by veering off in a completely different direction, since you can't see where they're going, and the haste will result in you accidentally putting even more distance between you and your target. That said, you should be able to avoid this problem to some extent by listening closely to the footsteps of your target, which should help you keep track of them. The second issue is mostly personal gripe, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway. This perk cannot be used with Lightborn at all, since that perk makes you completely immune to being blinded. And I found that annoying, since it meant I couldn't use Lightborn while getting footage, and that's one of my favorite perks. Disregarding my personal bias, I would say this can be a pretty decent perk, which kinda surprised me. When I first saw how this new version worked, my immediate reaction was to say that it sucks, but that mostly has to do with the fact that I hate dealing with blindness, which definitely colored my viewpoint a bit. It's an alright perk. And that's it for the Wraith. His power is pretty good, and for the most part easy to get the hang of. His perks, I feel, leave a lot to be desired. At least they're better than they used to be, though that's not really saying much. But I want to know what you think. Is there something I missed regarding Bloodhound? Am I totally wrong about how to use the Wailing Bell? Feel free to discuss in the comments, but in the meantime, I have more work to do. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.